at the Lake County Film Festival, and we have director and executive producer Josh Tsui on. Josh, nice to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Okay, now this is the part where I call the organ grinder monkey part, where you have to tell yet another audience about your film and describe it to them because they have not seen the film yet. So tell us
But
about Insert Coin.
absolutely, yeah. It's Intercoin is a documentary about the rise and fall of the arcade industry, particularly through the '90s, and it's with a particular focus on a video game company in Chicago called Midway Games. They're the company that created huge games such as Mortal Kombat and NBA Jam and Smash TV and others. And it really just kind of details how this crazy random ragtag, crew of game developers came together working in the back of a pinball factory under pretty bad conditions, and how they made these iconic franchises and how it blew up the industry, in more ways than one.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you a question that I almost never ask filmmakers,
Okay,
but it weighs on what I'm going to ask you following up on.
sure.
Um, Josh, why are you making this movie? Why you?
Well, so yeah, that's a good question. The reason why I made the movie is because you know I worked at Midway Games and during that era, and for a long time I always thought that it was a fascinating story of of not just the group of people but the games they made, and and this was in the '90s, and so 20 years later, it was always kind of stuck in my head. That's like this is a lot of people know about these games, but they don't really know all the work involved and how one game influenced another and how each team member influenced each other. And so I was in game development for 25 years, and towards the last few years, I started realizing that I never really got to make a film in my lifetime. I went to film school as a college student, and so I always joke that I kind of went through my midlife crisis, thinking it's like, man, I gotta get a film out of it, And the story was already in my head, and I thought, what, this seems like it would be a good subject for me to hit as my first film. And so luckily, I still had really good relationships with all the people that I worked with, and I talked to them about that, and they all were very happy to participate in it, and it just went from there. And in all honesty, I just I don't want to toot my own horn or anything like that, or to come off that way, but I just feel like having been there and seeing the overall, like having a holistic view of everything, I felt like I'd be one of the few people who'd be able to tell that story properly.
Well, and here's why I'm asking, why I asked that, because like a lawyer, I knew the answer. But it also goes into how you approach making a film.
Yeah,
And as a documentarian, we see, like, filmmakers who have made films about their own families.
yeah,
They've made films about, a film that they worked on, or what have you. So they do have an intimate knowledge of it. And they also have a sense of, which, you do in this case, I believe, a sense of responsibility toward telling the story right.
yeah.
And and so that's what I want you to talk about now, is your approach, which you've kind of previewed with your answer to that last question, but your approach in order to tell this story right.
Yeah, so it was really tough, to be quite honest with you, because I was always a bit concerned that I was too close to the subject, and as a first time documentarian, I wasn't sure if that was a good or bad thing, but those are the cards that I had to deal with, and so I had to I had to roll with that. And so a lot of it wasn't like I went in with a plan. I had an overall story structure, but I was given pretty good advice on, hey, you can go in with a preconceived story, but you have to kind of let people talk and then see where it leads you to. And then a lot of the storytelling obviously is in the editing. It's unlike a narrative film where you have a script. This is, you have an idea, but the script is developed in post production. And so you know and that's one of the reasons why I ended up editing the film, which was not the original idea. The original idea was that I would shoot it, do the interviews, maybe do a rough cut, and then have somebody else edit it. But as I got more and more into editing, to what you're stating, I felt the responsibility to really dig deep in the editing so I can get the point across. I can get my point across that I was trying to get out of my head. And I think had I brought in an external editor in this case, um, you know, there was a chance that it might become too sensationalized, or they would get into subjects that that they might find interesting, but for people who know the Midway story, they might not have. And so it was a difficult struggle. It took me a long time, in post production to kind of get to that point. But for me, it was, what are the important things to talk about the game and the team itself? Yeah, there might be interesting, salacious stories, but did that really help the story overall or not? Yeah, it might be a good soundbite, but was it really worth putting in there? And are certain subjects too weighty or certain subjects too lightweight to include in? And it was a constant battle, to be honest with you. Ultimately, for myself, it had I wanted to be celebrating these games and the people. Doesn't mean that I can be critical about them, but at the same time, it was I wasn't out to make an expose piece, and I stuck to my guns on that, and that's just kind of helped guide me throughout the process.
Well, listen, when oftentimes the approach to a film like this is, you create an outline,
Yep.
you are scripting an outline, and then you are acquiring interviews and footage to drop in to spots
Yeah.
on that outline to, to back up the
Yep.
point that you're making, right, and things like that.
Yeah.
And so that's, and especially in something like this, because it's not just chronological, right? That
Yep.
you're also telling people stories, and the quotes that you get may not line up specifically in the chronology that you want,
Yeah.
because it informs, again, especially in this film, you have the relationships between guys, and you have the relationships between companies, and so they kind of weighed on the decisions that they would make.
Yeah.
So the next thing that I'm curious to to find out from you is, because you're close to it,
Yeah.
and you're talking to a lot of a lot of people that you'd either known or worked with, um, you know was there a moment or a couple moments that you could point out where, in the midst of an interview, you were like going, holy crap, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there were a few different things. I think the best example was interviewing Neil Nicastro, who was the CEO of Midway, and he was our boss basically, and he's never done interviews about anything before, so I was shocked to get him in the first place. And and it was interesting, as I was going into the interview, I didn't know what to expect. Yeah, and that's how I felt with any of these people. But with Neil, he was so far removed from who I normally would deal with, that I had zero idea what he was going to say, and I thought he was going to be maybe reserved or defensive and such. And and as you see in the movie, he's very candid about things,
Yeah.
and in many ways he was the opposite of everybody else in the film. And so and he and so things like him making sure that Midway would litigate people as much as possible, like if somebody were to leave the company, he was going to make their life hell, things like that. We all knew a little bit about that back when when we were working there, but to hear him say things like that so bluntly was amazing. So yeah, in my head I was thinking like, holy crap, like he's like just letting it all out, and
Oh
which was
yeah, no,
fantastic.
that sequence alone is documentary gold.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
it really is. Are
Yeah,
the last question that I had for you also kind of lends drafts off of that a little bit as well, and it's this, again, as opposed to, say, me coming in and doing this documentary, who hasn't got a clue about any of this and is just discovering it all from the ground up, and doesn't know these guys, and so I'm making cold calls, and and I, if I'm the filmmaker and doing that, again, that's not the situation with you. You're like,
yeah,
you're like a friendly, as we call it, right?
yeah,
You're a friendly coming in the
yeah.
door. Um, and so because of that, was there a guy, or were there a couple guys in the film that were kind of looking at this as an opportunity, um, to tell their story right, or to tell a thing like you did you have, were there a couple of guys that were just, you could tell they're just chomping at the bit going, finally I can put this on the record, and nobody has gotten this before this point? Did you have moments like that?
Yeah, there were a couple of moments like that. I don't know if I want to name names or not, but there were moments where it's not like the whole interview was like that, but it's kind of like, hey, I'm going to clear the air on this, and and so in the film itself, you get a sense of it, but really where it affected things was in the way I would edit something, because it was like, all right, this person is now laying out the truth, which kind of debunked another person's interview. So that was really interesting to have, and it's the like, again, I'll leave it up to people's imagination, but there were a couple of people that really embellished what their contributions actually were, and in the and so I had to work around that gingerly, in the film itself, but it was, I had to be careful because it's I got a lot of stories that were contradicting each other, but the points of their stories were still valid, so having to kind of walk that tightrope was really interesting. But I'll tell you, there was one person that whose segment used to be a lot long in the film, and because it was like these great gold nuggets of information. But then as I was interviewing other people, his stuff started getting whittled down more and more, because I realized, oh, I think this guy was BSing me, So
Yes, yes.
so I
Well,
think I had more of that than the opposite.
well, I think, listen, what I think is the wonderful thing about Insert Coin is that it transcends the basic Wikipedia type history, right? And it really does deliver the personalities, and gives you the flavor of being in the room, or the warehouse, or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
with these guys, and what have you, and you know, and exactly what you're just talking about. There are those beautiful moments where where somebody goes, oh my God, yeah, they just copied this game point by point. It's easy to see that, and the next guy goes, I saw that game once or something. Right, and you're just laughing going, the truth is in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Of the two things.
Absolutely.
It's incredible. It is the best case of a documentary that isn't just informative and introducing you to a world, but it's really entertaining you through that world. And I think it really comes through, to your great credit. I think it really comes through your love of it, and
Oh,
and
thanks.
and that isn't always achieved in a documentary, but I think you really did in this case.
Well, thank you so much. It's always wonderful to hear when people say that you feel like you're in the room with the people, because that's one of the things I'm really proud of, was that I was able to get these guys to speak so candidly and comfortably. And I've had a lot of people mention that. It's like, yeah, this is like one of the few documentaries where I feel like somebody is talking to me like I'm sitting next to them at the bar and they're telling me stories, as opposed to something that's more clinical in nature. So thanks, that's really appreciated.
Absolutely. The film is Insert Coin. We've been talking to Josh Tsui, executive producer and director, most importantly, director of the film, which is screening at the Lake County Film Festival. Josh, congratulations again, and thank you for talking with us.
Thanks for having me on.
And we're out. All right, there you go. You survived